So I want to tell you in person about all the great things we did in 2021 so we can all congratulate ourselves. In addition to the speakers and the great monthly meetings and action alerts, we wrote and delivered 1,500 letters to members of Congress. So that's a big pat on the back. We also had some great events starting in January with the webinar, The Climate on Capitol Hill, a roadmap for Jewish climate advocacy in the 117th Congress. We put together a Jewish community letter on Build Back Better, and it was signed by 35 organizations. We participated in the Faiths for Climate Justice Vigil at the Department of State in October. And through that, we delivered a multi-faith statement calling on the international community gathered at COP26 to take speedy, responsible, and shared action to safeguard, restore, and heal our wounded humanity and the home entrusted to our stewardship. And lastly, our wonderful steering committee that keeps this whole ship moving gave 30 presentations and workshops about Jewish climate advocacy. So let's all pat ourselves on the back, because someone somewhere, whether they're in Congress or someone you connected with at one of our events, that someone is a different person with a greater awareness of climate change and how we need to solve it because of you. So good work.
Yay, thank you so much for reviewing that, because I know that some of us are text readers and some of us are listeners, audio learners. So it's really great to hear it and see it. But as Judy said, there was a letter sent out that details that in the newsletter. Yes. So if you want to review that, how much we had accomplished this year, you can. I now want to introduce our speaker for tonight, our second speaker for tonight, Raisa Orleans. She is from Southern California and a graduate of California State University at Fullerton, and has a master's of public policy from the University of Chicago. And she was on the staff of Representative Henry Waxman on the subcommittee on health and the environment, definitely an ally on climate. She worked for the Next Gen Climate Action in San Francisco on the 2014 campaign cycle. And she is now a senior analyst and director on climate political affairs, on climate political affairs at the Environmental Defense Fund, engaging lawmakers on Capitol Hill on federal methane policy, clean air, climate, and energy policy. So our action alert this month is on methane emissions, and there's a few people who are mostly more engaged in it than Raisa. So please, Raisa, give us your wisdom.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be able to speak to you all. And I love hearing from a lot of the grassroots organizations, because I know that the work you guys are doing is so important. You know, I'll just say, like, as a former congressional staffer, nothing makes these issues more real than having your constituents come in and tell you personal stories. And you know, it's so easy to get lost in like the spreadsheets that list numbers for appropriations requests, but like until you can contextualize it, the numbers don't mean a whole lot. So I really appreciate the work that you guys do. Please know that it is very important and truly vital at this point. So anyway, but taking a closer look at an issue that is very important to me and my organization, methane. So starting with, what is methane? Methane is essentially natural gas. It's a super pollutant, which means that it lives in the atmosphere for a shorter period of time than carbon dioxide, but it packs a larger punch. So essentially about 25% of the current global warming that we're experiencing today is attributable to methane emissions. So methane emissions happen across the natural gas supply chain. EDF, it also, there can be sourced from agriculture. EDF is quite focused on oil and gas pollution. And that's what I've been focused on as well. And it's a really interesting issue. It's obviously challenging to work in any climate on climate change issues because it can feel kind of existential in a lot of ways. And methane actually has a lot of really tangible solutions. So for starters, because natural gas escapes throughout the supply chain, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, it's sellable product. So capturing methane waste means that companies have more product to sell at the end of the day. It's released alongside health harming co-pollutants, which means that capping methane emissions reduces health harming pollution in oil and gas communities across the country. And also because it's odorless and it doesn't smell, finding methane leaks means that it requires some special technology, essentially kind of imagine an infrared type camera, which they now attach to drones and helicopters, but also somebody can go out into the field holding like a video camera and find it. But that means that the technology needs to be innovated, it needs to be developed, and it needs to be dispersed. So somebody needs to go out on the ground and do all these things. And that means job creation, and it means job creation in oil and gas communities, which tend to be hit hardest by regulation. But there's this sort of balance provided by what's created in the leak detection and repair space. So I like to think of methane as kind of like a win-win-win in that sense. And I think that, EDF is the Environmental Defense Fund is an economics focused organization. And I think that part of what drives our interest in this issue is that there's such an incredible economic efficiency to reducing methane emissions because it is such a super pollutant, but also because ultimately you're saving product. And that's why we've been able to see a lot of bipartisan support on this issue and a lot of industry support on this issue. So the quick sort of snapshot of the legislative landscape around this issue is that, forgive a kind of wonky term, so there is a mechanism known as the Congressional Review Act, which is a resolution of disapproval. It essentially means that if a Congress comes in, they can claw back a recent agency action. So before Obama left office, one of the agencies that has purview over public land space put out a rule saying you have to limit methane emissions on public lands. And when Trump came into office, the Republicans in Congress thought that they would be able to easily snap this back. And they tried to pass a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval. And it was one of the very few environmental victories that we saw of the entire Trump administration. 3 Republicans crossed party lines to support or to oppose it, and it remained the law of the land. So fast forward to a few years later, when Trump put out a rule that essentially rolled back the Obama rules and would have sort of curtailed additional potential regulatory pathways. When Biden came into office, we recognized an opportunity to sort of use this same tool to claw that back and it'll allow the Biden administration to move forward with promulgating really positive regulation. And again, we saw bipartisan support of this. It's a tough Congress, but we were able to do it in both the House and the Senate. We got somewhere in the mid-teens Republicans and 3 Republicans again in the Senate. And then really kind of more importantly, what we saw was a lot of industry stepping out on this, which is great because the regulated industry is obviously the constituency that you really want to hear from if you are able to be successful because you want to create a really collaborative process. So as it stands right now, the Biden administration put out what we think is an ambitious, but hopefully will be improved upon rule. Unfortunately, the public comment period just closed on that. Otherwise, I would encourage you to look at that. But essentially, what the administration is doing now is previously there had been a rule that was considered to cover new and modified sources, so any new production. But really the bulk of the emissions are coming from what already exists today. So this rule covers new and existing sources, and it's quite ambitious. So we're hoping to see a couple of minor improvements in that, but this is in a sort of shockingly great place right now. And I think it's because we've had, this bipartisan support and a demonstration that this is a political winner. And like I said, this is a win-win-win. So I think that the administration has fortunately picked up on that, and they're moving forward with these ambitious rules. And we can only hope that throughout this process, they're going to strengthen those before they're finalized. Refer to the rule. What are you talking about? We're talking about a rulemaking from the Environmental Protection Agency. So this is direct regulation. So it's essentially, it requires quarterly inspections of well sites. So that means that somebody has to go down with the camera and look around for the emissions. And once they find them, they have to fix them. And I should also say, I'm sorry, I mentioned earlier, some emissions are intentional and some are unintentional. So the intentional emissions are like, if you've seen flares, pictures of flares, the fire at the top of the stack, essentially, where they're drilling for natural gas, that's an intentional emission. Oftentimes, if they're drilling for oil and they find natural gas as a byproduct, they'll either vent or flare that. That's an intentional emission. And an unintentional emission is somebody's working on a pipeline and they leave a cap off. Sorry, maybe I'll wait for questions later, but so I think that's actually it. So happy to answer questions. And there is one, I guess, sorry, I will finish by saying there is one piece within the Build Back Better Act package that does pertain to methane emissions, and it's sort of a carbon pricing-esque design to combat methane emissions. So it's the first ever price on any sort of pollution that would pass Congress if it were to pass. And it's, we're all kind of eagerly waiting to see what the fate of Build Back Better is. But I think that this particular provision is in a good place because Senator Manchin was very well informed on it and was mostly supportive. And while West Virginia does have a lot of natural gas production, it actually doesn't have a huge methane emission profile. So hopefully the fact that there's some benefit to his state and the fact that he really was in on the ground floor in some ways in creating this program means that it lives on should Build Back Better pass. So I will leave, I'll stop talking now.
Deborah, you're muted.
I know. So thank you so much for introducing what you're reviewing what you're doing and clarifying things. And we usually do have quite a few questions, so it's good we have the time to do that. So let's see. So Bobby Adler was asking, how do we refer to the rule? And why don't you repeat that for our letter writing?
Sure. So you could refer to it as EPA's methane rule.
Yeah. Okay. And but in terms of legislation, it will clarify what's in the Build Back Better.
No, so these are two separate pieces.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
essentially, the rulemaking is like the long-term, like sort of steadfast approach, and then what's in Build Back Better can really accelerate a lot of those reductions. And it also just gives us an additional lever because, as much positive conversation as we've had with industry around this, we know that industry is quite good at working around regulation. We want to make sure that we're able to combat methane emissions totally sufficiently.
Right. And yeah, that a shockingly great place was really a good thing to hear. We hear such shocking news all the time, but a good place for that is terrific to hear. So let's see, Judy Burlfine, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. This is so exciting. So two things. You said that industry is supportive. I'm curious to know more about that and why they're supportive. And my other question is, you talked about the intentional and the unintentional releases. And are the intentional releases okay, or would these rulings prevent those also?
Yeah, so those are two really good questions. One, I should say, industry is not monolithic by any means. What we've seen a lot of are the larger oil and gas companies coming out in favor of regulation. And I think it's a couple of factors. One, like I said, this is saleable product, so it behooves them to reduce their emissions because that means that they benefit on a number of levels. And two, I think that there's a real reputational risk associated with oil and gas development at this point, and they recognize that, so they want to be seen as good actors. And then finally, they have large operations, so implementing some of these controls is really, really cost effective for them. And EDF, I didn't mention it because it's just so old at this point, but it is really compelling. We looked at it, and a 40% reduction in methane emissions would cost about a penny per dollar for overall to reduce their emissions. Sorry, that was poor phrasing, but you get what I'm saying. This is highly, highly cost effective for them.
Right.
And then on unintentional versus intentional. So somebody asked the excellent question that improvements can be made through the supplemental. This is one of the improvements we're hoping to make, is that they will ban what's called routine venting and flaring. And those are the intentional releases. So essentially they can put equipment on site where they can use the gas to power that, or they can feed it into a pipeline or transport it so that it becomes usable product as opposed to just releasing it into the atmosphere.
Okay. So Mirla wants clarification on if the EPA rules are put in place, they can be rolled back. That clawing back vision,
Yeah.
tooth and claw in Congress. So isn't having legislation more important because of that risk?
It is. So essentially that particular tool can only claw something back that happens at the end of an administration. A really funky timeline because it's based on the number of legislative days. And like the number of legislative days is not consistent across any span of time. So this is happening early enough in the administration that it wouldn't be subject to a Congressional Review Act resolution. But you're absolutely right that the next administration can come in and shift courses. It takes time. And frankly, for something like this, industry loves stability because they want to be able to project how their operation is going to function in 2 years and in 10 years. So I would hope that something like this, once it gets on the books, it is actually stable and lasts away. But you're absolutely correct that the only policy that is 100% durable is legislation. So yes, that is another reason that we find, it's called the MERP. It's a terrible acronym, but it's the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, which is included in Build Back Better. We're really hoping that makes it past the finish line along with the rest of the Build Back Better package for that reason.
Mm-hmm. But if that is broken up into smaller things, your feeling is that it will pass as part of the smaller bills?
I think so, for the reasons I mentioned, because we think that Manchin is in a good-ish place on it, but also because it's a revenue raiser. So it kind of addresses some of those larger concerns that have been raised about the spending of the package overall.
Right, right. Judy, did you have another question, or you just still have the hand up?
Well, since you're asking, can you explain more the price on methane and how it would be a revenue raiser? Like who pay? If they release it, then they get fined, or what? Can you clarify that? And then I'll take.
Yeah, sure. So it essentially, and I'm sorry, this is a little wonky, but it sets a threshold where if companies exceed that certain threshold, they're essentially taxed on a percentage of what is in excess to that threshold. So in a perfect world, it raises no money because no companies are exceeding that pollution threshold, but it's not a perfect world. We know that we're going to get money out of this. So like the CBO estimate was obviously that the program would raise revenue.
Okay. At least that's on our side. Yeah. Ziv, you have a question?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
You mentioned a little bit about the Trump administration, like clawing back a bunch of things in the EPA and gutting it. Do you feel like the EPA has made a full recovery, like not just in terms of legislation, but in terms of staff and power? How is that looking?
That's a really good question. I think that this is totally anecdotal, but I do think that EPA is in a good position at this point. I think that, in the early days, it is really hard to hire when you're hiring federal government positions. It just takes a long time. There's a lot of vetting. It just takes time. But we do know many people who have gone to EPA. They have a really wonderful staff there now. Unfortunately, the funding levels are still, because they keep passing continuing resolutions, the funding levels are still at the Trump era funding. But I think that there's reason to feel optimistic that EPA is fully functional and will be in this administration.
Well, that's good news too. Thank you, Zeev. Thank you. It's good to see your name with us tonight. There you are.
I'm cooking. I'm so sorry. And I was sorry. I think my mic was on at the beginning. You could hear me like my sink running. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
It's okay. Sometimes if we don't do two things at one time, we can't get anything done at all. Maury, you've got a question?
What's the role of gas stoves?
Oh boy.
I hate to ask this question.
It's really in the news.
Yeah, so I was going to say, this rule in particular from EPA extends to, so there's a whole natural gas supply chain, and essentially what this would cover is from extraction, so in the ground, to what they refer to as the city gates. So this doesn't touch gas that has already been processed and coming into your home. I know there is consideration of a rule related to gas stoves, but it's too far out of my purview to comment on.
Mm-hmm. But that is a very hot topic right now. And even our beloved Republic of Tacoma Park here in Maryland, is banning, it has made it all new construction can only have electric stoves. And if you renovate, I think you have to get rid of your gas stove. And I think they're probably doing some of that in other states as well. It's really an interesting change. Joyce, you have a question.
So there are two questions. Do Republicans have any role to play currently in helping pass legislation? And if you had a lobby meeting with a Republican, what would you be asking for?
So the answer is yes. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that any Republican is going to support the Build Back Better Act, but there are a huge number of other items that are coming up that having Republican support for is really, really significant. I mean, even recognizing at this point that Democrats are so unlikely to keep the House, thinking about the future and those votes coming up, it's about setting goals where they can be consistent and continue on as, if not climate champions, not climate antagonists, at least. And I meet with Republicans all the time. It's part of my job. Honestly, so my first question is usually like a general, where do you see your boss on climate, and what's their plan to address climate change? And I think that you'll find that there's a lot more common ground than you would think. So in previous Congresses, essentially what we had worked on with them is like an acknowledgement or building into government plans somehow that they take into account negative climate impacts. And I think that going forward, I mean, it's so hard to know what this political landscape is going to yield because it's an ugly place right now. But I think that there are still good Republicans out there. I think that they do care about this issue. They talk about it very differently than the Democrats do. The ambition is not matching the scope of the problem, unfortunately. But I think that it's not helpful to walk away from them. And in fact, it's the opposite. Like, I think engaging them and coming from a place of respect is really, really important, keeping them part of the dialogue. And while I completely understand that this issue has become overly politicized, like our climate can't handle that, because in the next 5 years, we're likely to see all of Congress shift to Republicans and we could see another Trump administration, and knowing that we have some of those potential victories and fights ahead of us, like I mentioned with the CRA during the Trump administration, like we need to be thinking long-term, and engaging those offices is so important for that.
Yeah, we have to be persistent. We have to keep going and keep not be hopeless and have hope. But Phyllis is saying that Pennsylvania is moving in the opposite direction. And Steve, did you have another question?
Oh, sorry.
Just your hand still up. I'm thinking that maybe it's a big mistake to still call it natural gas, like we're calling it climate warming, because that sounds soft and cozy. So I'm wondering if we can start changing it to something. Do they talk about that at EDF at all?
We usually refer to it as oil and gas development. And what we say, while we're not reflexively opposed to natural gas or development, our perspective is that it needs to be done in a way that makes it actually cleaner than coal. And if you're not reducing your methane emissions, it's not.
Yeah, right, exactly. All right, well, thank you. I think that maybe all, let's see. I think that's all of our questions tonight. I want to thank you so much for bringing this to the forefront and helping us to support our action alert, which Mirala in a minute is going to talk to us. And your first in your introduction to say that our work is so vital, that sometimes we think we're old-fashioned and traditional to be actually be writing letters, but it seems like there's a good response. We find that we get this response all the time. Keep doing it, keep it up. It's helpful to strengthen those people who are allies, and it's helpful to change minds for those who are not. So thank you.
I would say I love the letters. If I could also encourage people to attend town halls and events. I know that even some of our favorite members, they just get really beat up at these events, and it's hard to not, as a person or staff, let that get to you. So like, it's great when you can demonstrate any sort of support when some of these things turn ugly. And unfortunately, politics has always been ugly, and I feel like we're in a new era of ugly. So to the extent that you can be supportive, please do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That as much as we can, we need to show up at meetings where you expect there will be maybe even paid opposition. Who knows? Thank you so much, Raisa.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and keep up the good work in DC. And thank you so much. Thank you all for your wonderful questions as well, as usual. Very incisive questions. All right, let me turn the screen over to Mirala. She is going to talk to us about the action alert and also our future strategy for the coming year. So Mirala.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Now, I was so inspired by Raisa's presentation that I decided we should take action right on this call. So would everyone please turn on your video, and we're going to do a little photo petition with the sign that I made, turn away from burning gas. Okay, everybody turn on your video.
Okay.
We have to have your faces for this to be worthwhile, okay?
Even if you're eating dinner.
Lynn, turn on your video.
David,
I'm going to ask Ed to take the picture with you. Can you take a picture with the print screen? Okay, so everyone smile.
Yeah.
Turn away from burning gas. No more flaring, no more venting, no more leaks. You got it, Ed?
Right.
Let's try one more time.
One more. Okay, everyone smile.
Maybe we should frown.
Okay, keep going and I'll check to make sure I got it.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Shouldn't we frown to show our seriousness?
Okay, we'll do that on the next take.
Next one. Okay. All right.
Okay,
You're on.
well, I really have to say, I have several jobs that I'm supposed to do tonight. Okay. And before I go into them, I just want to say that if anyone has not written yet about methane and you want to do so, we're going to stay on for a few minutes after the call. We always end at 9, but we're going to stay on for a few minutes after the call and write some letters to our members of Congress together. So if you have time and you haven't communicated with your members of Congress and you're inspired, you can stay on afterwards.
Hey, Marilla, it's the left coast.
Yeah.
We are getting together tonight. Tonight. Yes.
Awesome.
So that's, yes.
It's early there. Okay.
Good.
Yay.
Perfect timing.
Yep.
Thank you, Corvallis. Okay.
All right.
All right. Second thing that I have to do, and it's good that I was calling on Ed, is we want to make a special thank you to Ed tonight. Ed, are you paying attention?
I am.
We want to thank Ed for his service on the steering committee. Ed has helped us so much with becoming a lot more organized, first of all. Second of all, with his incredible strategic thinking and his knowledge about lobbying in Congress. He has contributed so much to us over this past period. He has asked to step down from the steering committee, which we unfortunately had to accept, but we want to really thank you, Ed. And we are very grateful that you've agreed to stay on and help us with some of your roles with Jewish Earth Alliance national efforts, such as coordinating our letter writing and helping us with our upcoming lobby weeks. So we just want to thank you. And
Marilla, you're very
know-
welcome.
Yeah, we want to let you know that there's a special certificate coming to you, and we have planted a grove of trees at the Pearlstone Center in your honor.
Oh,
So thank you, Ed.
that's so nice. And I'm also relieved, Marilla, when you started, I thought I had died.
No.
This is much better.
Okay, so we think it's wonderful to have rotation on the steering committee. So if others are interested, or you know someone who might be interested in serving, be in touch with us. Okay, so that was one thing. Number 2, we are so excited to announce Jewish Earth Alliance's first annual lobby week. We've done lobbying before, but not in an organized way with the lobby week. I'm trying to think of a good name for our lobby week, something like lobby in your living room, because one of the only good things about the pandemic is that most lobbying has moved now online. So you don't have to go to the Hill or even to the district office of your member of Congress. You can participate online. Who here has already participated in lobbying with some other organization online? It's so easy, right? So that's great. So we're going to take that on with Jewish Earth Alliance. We know that to be influential, we have to build relationships with the offices of our members of Congress. We have to make our voices heard. So we're going to go and talk with them. I want to thank the activists from Florida, California, and Maryland that have already set up meetings. Thank you so much. And we want to have all our other teams do the same. We have everything ready to help you, to help make it easy. So please think about organizing a meeting in your district with your members of Congress from your living room. And we have also selected 3 issues, and we're asking you to lobby on one of them, but 3 issues that we're focusing on for the next few months. The first was our Tu B'Shvat Action Alert, which was about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. You know, we have to protect wildlife because that's the right thing to do. As people of faith, we appreciate all of creation. But also when we protect the wildlife, we protect the habitat that protects us. So this is a very important bill. It has bipartisan support. Where are those Floridians? Don't worry. It already has bipartisan support. This is something that can definitely pass. I was just checking in this morning, and apparently there was a special briefing for House staff on this bill this morning. And it's also under negotiations in the Senate in the Environment and Public Works committee. So things are really moving ahead with this bill. That's number one. Number two is what we talked about today, which is our February action alert about methane emissions. What did Raisa say? 25% of current global warming is attributable to methane. This is really something we need to do something about. So we're working on that. And then the third one is going to be our upcoming March action alert, which is about, I'm not sure what the right verb is, but building a healthy democracy. To solve the climate crisis, we need a healthy democracy in this country. We know from the polls that Americans want action on climate change. So why aren't we getting it? That's because of the big donors and the corporations that are buying off our members of Congress and the voter suppression that makes it hard for people who are affected by environmental injustices to vote. So we need to work on a healthy democracy. And I know you all know that the Senate did not pass the voting rights bill. Was everyone aware of that? Raise your hand if you were aware of that. Correct, correct. But did you know that there's actually discussions going on in Congress to try to pass at least some of the things that were in those voting rights bills? Who knows what they're focusing on right now? Which measure? Does anyone know?
Larry, do you know?
Do I know what they're
Doesn't anyone else read the Hill besides me? No. You really should check the Hill. You really should check the Hill. Okay.
What,
So
Phyllis, what?
The Electoral College reforms.
that's right, Phyllis,
Yeah.
you win. Phyllis gets the prize.
Okay.
It's the Electoral Count Act. Do you know when that was passed, that act? 1887.
Also important.
Apparently it needs to be updated. But what's happening is that has some support to be fixed. And if you Google it, you'll see that Republicans and Democrats are both writing about how both could benefit by updating the Electoral Count Act. And what's going to happen probably is that if they get some kind of agreement on that, then they're going to add in amendments about other things, other kinds of voting, some of the other measures to protect our voting. I don't know about the money in politics. Personally, I'm even more upset about the money and the campaign finance and all of that. But that could be possibly addressed as well. That was in some of the voting rights bills. So that is super important. So those are the three issues that we're focusing on. My guess is we'll be focusing on them for a while, along with Build Back Better. And we're asking you to, when you set up your lobbying meeting, to pick one of those issues that you think you can make some headway or that's important for your office, and focus on that issue. Okay, was I supposed to talk about anything else? No, lobby in your living room. Lobby in your living room. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Okay, any questions? Someone must have one.
I would call it lazy lobbying because you don't have to go anywhere, but that's not a good idea.
Actually, I just
almost
lobbied.
got rid of the Electoral College in the 60s. It came so close to just getting rid of it and turning us into an almost real democracy.
Yeah. In the 60s?
That's what we really need to do.
That would be good.
Yeah. And maybe
Okay.
DC will. get the
Wouldn't
vote
we
at the
need a
same time.
2/3 majority of people willing to vote for it? Because that's a constitutional
Amendment?
amendment. Yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
So
Oh, I guess I better research that. I don't know, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think
think
wouldn't all the
Congress
states
can get rid of it.
Maybe all the states. would
I think
have
Congress could get rid of it, but it would need a 2/3 vote.
it. Okay.
Okay.
Any
Diane?
questions about
Yeah.
our upcoming? Oh, did I tell you the dates of our lobby week? February 28th to March 11th.
Right.
Judy, did I miss anything?
Oh, you were fantastic.
Okay, and it's 8:55, which gives us 5 minutes to write letters afterwards without even.
Oh, but I have a sermon to give.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Devorah. Thank
me
you all for being with us.
I just wanted to say that, there it is. That this tour portion this week is Kiti Sa, which is famous for the golden calf. but we also sometimes forget that in it is the story of the cleft of the rock, where God places Moses in a fissure in a rock and then covers the rock with God's hand and walks by. And we hear and cries out God's essence, these different values that of the divine. And you hear it at the high holidays, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, the 13 attributes. And so I'm just so proud of all. So it was the difference. So these two stories balance each other out, that in a time of great stress and uncertainty for our people, that Moses was up on the mountain, he disappeared. They didn't know, they just came out of slavery. They are in the middle of the desert. They don't know what's going on. They build an idol, a golden idol, something that they can see and touch and feel, something material. And when we're in times of stress, a lot of times we also need something material to hang on to, even a teddy bear, even something from our childhood. But this vision of the cleft of the rock, where Moses faces the fierce truth of the divine. He can't see God, but he faces God as God passes by. And so he's facing this fierceness. And so I send my blessings to all of you for not turning aside to idols, but facing the fierce truth of our world today. May you be blessed with chazak, with strength, shalem, wholeness, Rahman, remember Rahman as compassion for yourself, and lirdov tzedek, to, as Andrew said, to pursue justice in all the work that you do. And let us all say, Amen.
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 Thank you,
Deborah,
all, and
Deborah,
thank you,
excuse
Andrew.
me, Deborah,
Yes,
Deborah,
yes.
just for a second, I hate to say anything after Amen, but I did put into the chat the link to the picture we just took. So if anybody wants to see
Great.
how that came out, feel free.
Oh,
Sorry.
great. Oh, yeah. No, that's very important. Great that we get that. Oops, let's see, where'd I go? I want to again thank our steering committee and all that help us with this video call and writing your letters, and also Andrew Mandel for being with us tonight. And